somebody was like, "Hey guys, have you ever like gone to ChatGPT and started typing in a prompt and like then as you're talking through the problem, you figure out the answer?" And then somebody replied, they're like, "Oh, it looks like somebody just discovered thinking."
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 518 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Matt and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is April 25th, 2020 vibes. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you to our recurring supporters who keep our podcast going through monthly donations. And we got a message from Ben Johns who says, "Congrats on shipping Crashlands 2. Thanks for bringing multiple premium games with cross-platform saves to mobile. For my second playthrough of the OG Crashlands, my son is joining since you added local co-op. Here's to hoping for a Switch version of Crashlands 2 and or local co-op."
Ooh.
So, yeah, thanks so much for the donation. No promises on those requests, you know.
Yeah, if you
time will tell.
if you bump that donation by a really large amount, then we could just commit.
Yeah, then we'll talk.
Commit right to
Negotiation.
Like, we can't even get a Switch dev kit, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Nobody can.
Actually, if you can get us a Switch 2 dev kit,
Yeah, then we'll be talking.
now we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much for the donation and the kind words. All right, so we got lots of things going on in the studio this week. For starters, we're doing kind of a world tour, and by that I mean we're going on some random podcasts sometimes to talk about Crashlands 2. So I was interviewed by Scott Johnson on the Core podcast to talk about Crashlands 2. So that was just like a one-on-one interview, which was pretty fun. And
Was that more like design focused, or what's the angle?
It was more kind of player focused, but he had a lot of questions about like the studio and how we do things and how we made Crashlands 2 in a lot of cases.
Yeah, their podcast is kind of like most of their episodes are just like what these three guys talking about the games they're playing and what they think about them. It's definitely more of a player experience and player facing kind of a podcast in general. And they sometimes bring on somebody to kind of do like how's the sausage made, kind of an episode. So it's that kind of a thing.
And that was pretty cool because Scott, like he played original Crashlands. He played Levelhead.
Oh, dang.
Big Levelhead fan. I was like, oh my God, we found one in the wild. So yeah, that was super cool to chat with him about that. And then
speaking
Adam
of Levelhead, it's also the 5-year anniversary when this episode comes out. So
yeah, on the 30th. So happy birthday, Levelhead.
Happy birthday,
you little baby platformer maker. Oh, he's so cute.
Yeah, it always feels weird because we launched it into early access and then we worked on it for a year and we were selling it that whole time and players were playing it and then we quote launched it.
Yep.
So to me, it always feels like the early access launch was actually the launch. But technically, that was like April 30th was 2020 was when we launched it on everything, right? That was like Google Play and Play Pass and Xbox and just everything. So that's pretty cool. And then Adam and I were on the Game Maker's Notebook podcast where we were interviewed by Trent Custers. And Trent is from League of Geeks, the studio that made Armello. And he had lots of questions about how we did stuff. So we got a little bit more technical with that when we were talking about kind of Bscotch ID and kind of how that whole thing came about. He wanted to go way back, so he had some questions too about like when we were kids and what got us interested in video games even from like an early age and that kind of stuff. So quite a different angle of conversation, but
there's also a parallel there because so League of Geeks kind of like we were sort of a cohort, right? We were like League of Geeks was right a little bit before us on like. Because I think
those early indies.
Yeah, those early, not the earliest indies. Because like we had like the start of the indie like wave was kind of 2008, right? That's when stuff started to kind of like really take off. And then kind of 2010, 11, I think was kind of roughly where the peak was. And then it was kind of like pretty good. And then it was starting to drop off. And basically when we were trying to start launching games, right?
Yep.
But there was still something there back when we were doing it. And so Armello was like a little bit, it was like around the same time, I think a little bit ahead of us. and did really well. And so at that time, there's this cohort of people we were just seeing everywhere, so we like everywhere we went, every GDC, Sam went to DICE a couple times, and like everywhere we went.
Go to PAX.
Yeah, like League of Geeks was there, Trent was there, so we kind of kept at the same time. And so we were facing kind of the same, we faced the same industry and the same industry path, right? But what happened to each of our studios as we were running into that, and our relationship to the broader industry and stuff was pretty different. And so it was really interesting to be like kind of swapping some stories about, about like, what did it look like to come up at the same time in the same context, but then have these overall different experiences and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, they were much more Steam focused when we were much more mobile focused in the early days.
Yep.
Right.
And they were a bigger team, and they were out of Australia, which I think at the time there was a lot of government initiatives trying to like bring funding into games and stuff like that. So they had a different kind of an ecosystem and a different kind of support system, which actually I think in their case it might have worked to their detriment a little bit because they grew really fast because they had all that stuff going on. Which then, of course, that introduces new struggles and challenges and stuff like that. So, it's been it was pretty good. It's a pretty good conversation. So, the core podcast, we'll put a link to that one in the show notes of today's episode, and then if the episode with Trent is out, then we'll put a link to that one as well. So if anybody wants to hear those.
Yeah, we don't actually know when it comes out. I don't think it's going to be like a long time away, but it might not be by the time this episode goes live. Yeah. So we'll see.
Other news, plushies, Flux Plush.
Flux Plush. Very close.
We're doing a run of 200. Like basically, we need to get 200 orders for them to actually be made and ship. I think as of recording this episode, there's only like 1,400 left before we hit that threshold.
14. Not 14.
Sorry, 14 left out of 200 remaining. So, and once we hit that 200, we can still take orders. It's just it's like a Kickstarter. Like we got to hit that 200 before they ship.
But also like a Kickstarter, this is it. So if you don't get one this time around, you're not getting one. So if it's the kind of thing you're into, if you want to have a little piece of Crashlands history and own a thing that only is going to exist this one time, then that's the way to do it.
Go for it.
Yep.
It is pretty funny though, seeing like I can see the psychology behind why it's done like this, because there's like a handful of people in the community who really want this plush. Yep. And so they're just like constantly spamming the link to other people and be like, hey, have you got your Flux Plush yet? You got your orders in? Cause if we don't get to 200, then they don't ship. So, so definitely check that out. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. A lot of links today. So get your link clicking finger ready.
Yep.
Otherwise for Crashlands 2 stuff, we've got kind of two things. One, we just want to give a big shout out to Gloopy in the community, who has been aggressively compiling information about where everything is and how to do all the quests and whatever in Crashlands 2. And they put together a map that has it's a very well made map that has just everything on it. All the gems, all of the items you can find, the schematics, where different quest locations are, and all that stuff. So I think we've actually got that pinned in our Discord. So if you're playing Crashlands 2 and you're like, I'm stuck on something, did I miss something, whatever, you can just pop in. I think it's in like the Crashlands 2 spoilers channel and just pop open the pins and you can see Gloopy's
complete mass. Yeah, it's pretty dope.
So that's very cool. And it helps us a lot too, because, if we don't have people in the community doing that stuff, then oftentimes, then we would need to go and like unstick people or explain, answer people. Like we don't have to, but we want people to have a good time. So if somebody comes in like, I don't know what to do.
Well, it's about getting the flywheel going, So or it's basically trying to get the community into a self-sustaining state where the stuff that nobody knows yet and nobody is sure about yet, then if we can step in and address that and clear some things up, and then more and more people like then share that with each other, and then at some point
community knowledge.
Which is actually I think
water. Yeah,
I think we've reached that kind of self-sustaining state already, where in the Steam forums, because I used to like for the first week of launch, I was every single day pop open.
Adam had to put on his waders, go into that
the forums, water. Pop and then go through the Discord, and I would be like, okay, what's going on? Are there bugs that people are going on? And our QA team is also doing this, right? And so kind of everybody is like all up in the business of where people are posting stuff to figure out like what are the issues. Because most of that is trying to filter out an actual issue from somebody being confused or whatever, right?
Or just having a personal preference about.
Yeah,
something.
and so that in that early game launch thing, you have to like wade through so much stuff because for a tight game launch like the one that we had, where there just aren't very many bugs, and the bugs that are there really minor, don't really impact gameplay very much, right? Then the nice thing is that you're not seeing bugs, right? But the problem is that there still could be some in there. And so now like overwhelmingly what you're seeing are reports of things that are not bugs, but you still have to wade through it just in case there's something in there. And so I think we've kind of hit that point where we're confident we've found all the bugs that are really impacting people. And the community has become self-sustaining because now when I pop up with the Steam forums, it's just, I see every thread has like a little number 5 or 10 or 12 or whatever next to it to show that like people are talking in there. Right. So, and every once in a while when I pop one open, someone's giving answers, and so I just assume that's generally true. And so that's been very nice to see, especially because of how intense that first week was of fielding so many questions and knowing that if we didn't provide an answer, then someone is kind of just stuck because they don't have any other way to find an answer if they can't figure it out themselves. And so being past that window, super dope.
Yeah. And it's hard to find the line too, because I think we talked about this last week as well, but oftentimes somebody will be quote stuck on something, but it's like a quest or something like that. But the quest literally explains what to do in text, right? And so then they just haven't really read it thoroughly, but they consider that they're stuck. And so they don't reread the quest. They just start going out and trying to get answers elsewhere. And so oftentimes, the way that we assist that person is to just retype back to them what they took a screenshot of in the quest log or whatever. And then they're like, oh, okay, nice.
Yeah. It's that combo. Sometimes the answer is literally in the questioner right there. But when it's not, usually the answer, it was kind of funny to see the community start giving also, was like, just keep doing your quests.
Just keep playing the game.
Keep playing the game.
But it actually, this reminds me a lot of, I saw some, it's probably a tweet or something from this past week where somebody was like, hey guys, have you ever like gone to ChatGPT and started typing in a prompt and like then as you're talking through the problem, you figure out the answer? And then somebody replied, they're like, oh, it looks like somebody just discovered thinking. But that's just it, right? It's like if you come across a problem and then you're just like, I don't know what to do. And then, you just start going around trying to find somebody else to solve it.
Right.
Then yeah, you're always going to be kind of stuck if that's your way of operating.
But I think we also see this too. Like, I mean, as you're saying, like, and we all, especially as programmers, have all experienced this where you head over to Stack Overflow or some forum or something and you're like, oh, I'm running into this thing. And as you start to describe it, you're like, oh, wait, there it is, and you see this.
It's a very tongue in cheek kind of response, but like, yeah, just talking through a problem does help you solve it.
But you can see it in the way that people come in to ask the questions, right? Because you rarely see somebody come in and say like, okay, here's what I understand is what's going on. Almost the only thing you ever see is people pop in and they're like, I need help with, and they vaguely describe something, right? Or they'll say this vague thing doesn't work. And like they come in with that. There's no additional context. There's no, like they haven't put in any of that work, right?
Yeah. And so like, yeah, and that's one of the things we talked about kind of early, like before we launched Crashlands 2, about kind of the worries of like, if you're making a more open game that isn't super hand-holdy, then it does demand a certain amount of engagement from people where like they can't just assume that the game's broken because they haven't been immediately handed the answer to something. They have to kind of trust that it's coming, or that if they kind of explore a little bit or think back to stuff that they did before. But we've also talked about how like it is a game that takes, over 30 hours to get through. A lot of people are still like in that kind of 40 to 50 hour kind of range. You spread that out over a long period of time, and like you're just gonna forget stuff.
That's left to remember.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's where I think the biggest like real challenge comes in, is trying to make it so that a person can understand what they're if they're that difference between I don't know what this is because I haven't seen it yet, and I don't know what this is because I've forgotten.
I forgot.
Yeah. And that distinction.
Because you don't know.
Yeah, because you can't know for sure. And because the way that the game unfolds the whole time is you very frequently like unlock a recipe, unlock some research, whatever, or hear somebody reference something in a quest that is something you have not seen before. Right, because they're hinting at a thing that's going to come later, or you just did stuff in a slightly different order, or whatever. And so you learn pretty quickly in the game that, like, yeah, stuff is going to be talked about that I can't do anything with yet, and it's telling me about stuff that I'll be able to do. Right,
right.
And
so if you make the wrong assumption and put something in that bucket, that
and that's really is if somebody just forgets about something they've already seen, then their assumption is, I guess that's coming later, and
maybe it'll come later.
Yeah, and that's the experience we're seeing where actually people end up with a broken game experience for their own playthrough. Where there's something they just assume they haven't seen. They just don't remember it at all. And so they're like, okay, well, it's coming later. And then they'll just play for a long time in the absence.
It's impressive that the game holds up long enough because that's like, that you could just sort of make
people have done some remarkable things that the game has tolerated. And it's especially some of the early game stuff where like people just don't bother to finish those instant quests, the ones that in the first 3 minutes you can do, that the game's
and they really do everything else.
And they just do everything else. And so they'll be at a point where like they still can't make docks or can't make floors or don't even have build mode. And again, those things are unlocked within minutes of the beginning of the game if you do what the game is telling you to do, right? And also with everything about the game, like we're putting map markers on. We're doing so much stuff to be like, hey, go do those things, right? But you could still kind of not.
That's the truth.
And people put in a remarkable amount of effort to avoid reading or to avoid doing what the game is telling them to do. We even had, I think probably my favorite one that I've seen so far was so later in the game, I don't think it's a spoiler to talk about hook points. Is that a spoiler to talk? Here, well, so that doesn't tell you what that is. So I'll just say this. There's a later on in the game, someone is trying to figure out how to get across a gap, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a little quest moment that happens where the character tells you, hey, here's how you get across the gap.
If you want to get across gaps, use one of these.
Do this, craft these things, do this stuff, right? And so somebody just kind of was like, no, I guess, like I just didn't read it or whatever. And came up with a strategy that required, it's a smart strategy. That's the way to work around it, where they would literally go craft all the stuff that you need to plant things, get the seeds for a particular kind of environmental object that behaves in a similar way to the thing they were supposed to be crafting, plant it, wait for it to grow, and then use it to accomplish the same.
Which, very impressive.
Very impressive. Very clever.
It reminds me a lot the idea of skipping all the dialogue and not reading anything that the game tells you, and then having to take these weird circuitous paths. It just reminds me of the comment about like meetings versus programming, right? Where it's like you can save yourself 2 weeks of programming if you have a 2-hour meeting, and it's like, but 2-hour meetings suck. Nobody wants to sit there and like think through problems hypothetically and talk through it. You just want to go do things, right? Man. Yeah. And so that's kind of the energy that some players are bringing into the story side of things. We're just like, yeah, shut up, dismiss. All right, now what am I supposed to do? And then, well, good luck. Go wander, I guess, because we told you, but you just kind of blazed right through. So
yeah, and I think that's been the interesting thing in particular is to see the ways that players approach the game when they refuse to read anything in it, right?
Which also saying refuse is accurate in the sense that we've had players who
I do mean refuse.
Players have literally said to us, I refuse to read the dialogue. Like not that. Oh yeah, I skipped it a bit. They're like, no, I'm making it a point to not do this.
They're just spam clicking through and not even trying to read it as it blows by. It's just and
just get it out of my face.
And on principle, they're just like, no, dialogue is the worst thing that ever existed, and so I will not. And I think that's been the interesting thing is like we didn't really
test the game under that kind of. I don't want to say like adversarial gameplay, but it kind of is where it's like there's this entire web of things going on in the game that are there to explain what's happening and what to do and where to go and what things are and who's important and why everything is happening, and you're just like, no, I don't want any of that. And all that's there for a reason. But yeah, if you decide outwardly to just not participate in that, then you'll be confused a little bit.
Yeah, well, and I think it's basically people who are like looking for just a crafting game experience, you know. So they're like, essentially they want Minecraft.
Yeah, whenever you're doing genre kind of mashups, right? This is sort of the funny part that happens. People always think you're like, oh yeah, if we make a game it's like Minecraft and it's like a MOBA, then we get both audiences. And it's like, well, you might initially be able to attract both audiences, but they're both going to be upset about parts of the design.
Each one has things they want to skip.
Yeah, exactly. So like, how do you marry that? So you don't realize that, like, yeah, oftentimes in order to make something new, you got to pick like an interesting Venn diagram overlap, but you got to be really careful then with like how you construct it, which in our case, putting RPG into a crafting game, we've talked about a lot. Those are two very hard, design patterns to smush together effectively without having some part of your audience just bounce. So I think the truth is we didn't necessarily accommodate, didn't think enough probably ahead of time about that particular audience angle. Just like, all right, if someone just is blasting through, do we have just enough like signals, just enough markers that they could essentially not read, right?
But also
a lot of what we've been doing.
We also, I think, don't have to design to allow that. I mean, we didn't, but also, there's a question of how.
Like it's like some of the stuff that we're like, given what the game is, it seems like those people wouldn't be interested in it. But actually they are, because the game still has really good parts with all the other stuff.
Yeah, because the gameplay is really good.
Exactly. So
I think that is one of those, like, I agree that we didn't think about that probably enough. There was some level of accommodation that we needed. It's most importantly in the very early part of the game when we're unrolling mechanics and how stuff works. Because after that, as long as people have access to all the stuff that's in there and can use the feature set, basically, then at that point, whatever. It's like, it's on them. They'll figure stuff out. They'll Google shit, whatever. Right. And I think the other part too is that it's less of a problem now that the community has resources. There's the answers to questions. There's Googleable stuff. There's videos for how to. There's just so many resources out there now that somebody can just refuse to read and then instead go spend a whole bunch of time outside of the game searching for things and try to get answers. Now they could do what they normally do, which is just instantly go ask instead of doing a search, because I feel like there's a high overlap between people who refuse to read and people who
also refuse to Google.
So unfortunately, they still kind of take up a lot of other people's time being like, hey, how do I do this thing that the game told me to?
That's already been explained.
But at least now the community is large enough and active enough that they can kind of.
We got our Gloopy map, so people can just be like, "Look at the Gloopy map." Yeah. So otherwise, though, we have been doing a lot of work for patch 1.1 to actually streamline and address a lot of these kinds of problems. So a lot of like quest tweaks, map tweaks, changes to some layouts of some areas and things, changes to some descriptions and iconography, just to kind of like, not because we want not reading anything to be like the way to play the game, but it's that we don't want it to be the case that 90% of the community interactions are people just busting in and being like, what do I do here? Right. Yeah. Ideally it's more interesting than that. Yep. So
and I think this is part of like the defensive design it's something that like a lot of players, it's kind of like the yellow paint thing. There was that whole fucking discourse about a while ago, where some game came out and they like highlighted where you're supposed to go, or like
it's like all AAA games. Like, I think it's Assassin's Creed recently. They were like, we had to put yellow paint on the ledges.
Yeah, people are giving them so much shit when the reality is like, if you have a successful game, it's being played by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions even of people, right? And at those scales, even if 1% of people just are absolutely not doing what the game, they're just like, they're not using their brains when the stuff is going on, right? And
on purpose.
And there's also people who just like can't figure certain things out at certain moments in time, right? That you also need to support, but it's less of like a defensive design than it is the people who are like actively trying to sabotage.
It's a difference between like good design versus like designing against adversarial players who are like, I will not listen to you.
And the thing is, like, if you don't do that to some extent, then those players appear en masse in your support system, in your communities, and they tend to also be fairly hostile when they come in because they've had a bad experience. They're confused about something, right? Yep. And so part of a required bit of defensive design in games is to figure out, how do I identify the kinds of adversarial patterns I'm going to have with players who are just really intentionally not engaging with the game as it is clearly meant to be engaged with, right?
Or even like where the reality is that there's too much complexity. So like in the case of ledges, like the joke here is basically you need to put yellow paint, you need to put some kind of marker on these 3D, they're a little 3D structure, right?
Yeah, sometimes you like, truly need them for everybody.
Yeah, it's usually like literally you have a cool rock wall, right? And the rock wall is doing all sorts of stuff. It's concave, it's convex, it's like popping in and out, whatever. And there's some places on that you can grab. And you know what? It just is the case, like depending on the lighting. Depending if it's in like maybe it's raining at this particular time where you approach this wall, you will not be able to see it just straight up. You have to like go just sort of rub your body against the wall until like a little fucking,
sometimes it's a truly essential part of design given the rest of the context,
so it's like,
but I think it's that combo. That's where the nuance is, right? Is sometimes, like you're saying, because of the complexity of the game, because of a million conditions, like you just need a way to be like, yeah, this is the spot, right? But
I did see, I was reading, I think it was by the guy who made Ratchet and Clank. He mentioned he had this funny story about this guy who had a game director who had a card in his pocket that he'd whip out at meetings sometimes, and the card just said, "It's a game." And so every so often they'd be having a discussion about it's like something like this going around, and where you get to come back to the fact that like it is still a game we're making. Like it's okay to have like, yeah, it's supposed to be, I don't know, Assassin's Creed. So it's like everything's super realistic and polygons are cool and it's all like real as hell. But it's a game and people need to be able to tell how to climb on walls. So like just put some yellow paint on the walls. It's like, it's not that it's still a game at the end of the day. You want people to play it.
Well, that actually kind of makes me think of like, so we're adding the compendium in patch 1.1. And one of the reasons I think why we held off on adding it is because we built this world. I wanted there to be a feeling of like mystery, you know. It's like what's out there? How big is this place? Like what's out in the wilderness? What are the crazy things that I'm going to come across? And once you have like a book that you could open up and it's like, here's the 90 things that you will see. Yep. And there's 102 gems to collect. And like suddenly
it's a game.
It collapses the world down into a game, right? And so we held off on that because we're like, it feels like it undercuts the world building that you're trying to do because it gamifies it, right? But the thing is, it's a game. It's a game. It is a game. Yeah, it's sometimes
so like, you still want people to be able to push all the way through the game, right? To play the whole game. So you always are on that line of like, okay, yeah, do you expose more of the gaminess of the game so that people can have more readability, can actually access the game world, or do you keep it more obfuscated so that it feels less gamey, feels more like a real place, or requires more, puzzling around to kind of figure out what to do? Well, it's always a line.
In a way though, like my first instinct would like back when we were considering whether to do the compendium is it feels like it shrinks the world because of that, right? Because it's like you can see all the things, but actually from a player perspective, it makes the world bigger because let's say you play through the game without the compendium, which is how people have been playing so far because it doesn't exist. And there's parts of the map that are blacked out that you haven't been to, right? And you play all the way through the game, you get to the very end, you beat the last boss, and you're like, oh, I beat the game. I did everything, right?
You percented it, right? So
and you don't realize that you missed half of it. You just blaze through, like there's a ton of items that you never crafted, so you never got to play around with these different builds. There's a bunch of pets that you didn't find. There's like half the recipes that you missed. You missed half the gems. There's a whole storyline that you missed, which is happening for a lot of people.
Well, we were seeing this in the early days, right? As people started to complete the game, then we were seeing all these like 30, 35-ish hour like playtimes to complete the game, right? And there's two parts for that. One is that has to be true because when the game's only been out for a few days, then the only people who could have beat are the people who beat it in a short time, right? Yeah. So there's a bias towards
more intense, kind of more skilled players who are just like blazing through.
Yeah, blazing through it, right? Those are the only people who could have beat it, right? So, but it gives us, so we start with this like sense of bias of like, oh God, there's actually less game here than like we thought, right? But as the game is out for longer and people are completing it at more normal rates, they start to complete it and they're longer time spans, right? So that starts to kind of push back the other way. But I was still surprised just by how many people were like, oh yeah, like beat the whole last game in like 32, 35 hours, whatever. Because it took me, knowing a lot about the game, 50 hours, a little more than 50 hours to beat it, right? And so part of that question I always had, like when I'm seeing these people beat the games, I'm like, but what does that mean though, right? Does that mean that you are like extremely good and somehow did all of the stuff just like faster than it seems humanly possible to me, right? And like, is there some like cool way of approaching how to play this game that like I'm not even aware of?
Just skip all the dialogue, man.
Or did you just fucking skip everything, right? And so because you could skip so much stuff in the game. Like it's not, the game doesn't make it obvious what stuff is like fully skippable, right? But you could still like fairly, like if you could still kind of get a sense of like, oh, if I do this, I'm probably going to push it ahead, and you could kind of beeline through. And there's so much of the world that if you don't go explore everything, just stuff doesn't happen that could have happened. And so that's like definitely side content, right? And so I think this is the fun part about the compendium is now when somebody goes like post their credits shot and it's like, hey, I beat the game, they can also post their compendium shot and be like, and now the rest of us get to see, oh, you only found a third of the stuff. And, and so it gives it more, and I think it actually just adds this new layer for, like I was saying about the idea of like players feeling how big the world is. Cause there's kind of like the players who have no sense of it and are just kind of seeing these, I don't know, paint by numbers, whatever. They're seeing this list of stuff, right? But they don't have a sense of how that fits in the world, right? And so I think for players who would naturally already explore everything and are kind of like slowly unlocking that stuff, it gives them kind of this fun additional objective and like
it's your Pokedex,
Yeah, it's your Pokedex. Because like you're going in the world doing stuff, but also you're slowly like chipping away at this like global repository of all the cool stuff that there is, right? And getting a sense of like, they're like, you're getting a sense of how explored it is, which for somebody like me who I just 100% these kinds of games, I can be like, I get to obsess about, now I know that I'm missing something.
You get to actually do that.
I get to actually do that, which is then really cool and fun for somebody like me who wants to 100% something. Right. And for somebody who doesn't really care about that, they just like they just want to fight the bosses and get to the end of the game. They get to have a sense of like, oh, here's all the stuff that I didn't do though, right? So they have a better sense of what their gameplay experience was, right? Was it the whole game or was it beating the game, since those are not the same thing? And especially for those people who are like, who are like beat it really fast and are almost all of them have been like fucking loved it, one of my favorite games, whatever, right? But there are a few people who are like, just didn't seem like there was that much here when they beat it in like 30 hours, And the thing that I wanted to know was, what did you do? Did you do the whole game or did you just beat the game, right? And we couldn't answer that. And now we can check people and be like, so you said there wasn't much game. Show
but
us
also it just kind of also makes you think of like the insane gamer take that like 35 hours.
Yeah, it's not enough game.
Much. Because you can also go the other way, because where people say like, oh yeah, it takes like a minimum of 60 hours to get through this. This game's way too long, right? Yep. But then if it's like 50, then people are like, this is too short. There's not enough.
There's no perfect. There's no perfect amount. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And of course,
there's no price and game length combination that doesn't have somebody complaining about, of course, one way or the other.
Yeah. But I think there is some like legitimate commentary from people who basically want some way of getting more kind of like replay value out of the game. Yep. Like if you have played through it, 100% did it, done all this stuff, got all the achievements or whatever, then you're like, is there more to do? Because once you're at the end of the game, you got all this cool equipment stuff, but then if there's no new bosses to fight, you beat everything, right? So I definitely understand that desire. We'll be working on some stuff to try to see if we can find interesting ways to use that. One of the ways is a pretty low hanging fruit, which is just like add more game modes or difficulty levels. And so we do have some of that coming in patch 1.1. I'm particularly pumped for the new higher difficulty level, the legend mode, which
does it also impact whopper fishing?
Yeah.
Okay. Because when I played on challenge mode, the current top mode, right? I play a lot of my time on mobile, which is just everything's harder, and so, but even still, I played for like, I don't know, I want to say like 4 hours or something on challenge mode, and
fishing's hard.
Fishing, the fucking whopper fishing, I maybe a third of the time I could do it, which is a lot better than zero. So it's like,
it's so wild. Yeah.
You get better. Once you practice at it a bunch, you'll get really good.
Yeah, exactly. I would get good at it if I did it a lot, you know.
Yeah, but it is so much harder than
it is a lot, like surprisingly harder than adventure mode for whopper fishing. And then otherwise I was just kind of getting, you know, like it was, I could do it. Like I was dying a lot, but not constantly, you know, when I was fighting stuff. But it was just enough where I was like, I don't think this is for me, like adding any extra layer of fun, because my main experience was just dying more. And because like I play Crashlands 2 and you know, Terraria and other games like that, right? The combat is a thing that I kind of have to do to get resources, you know, like that's how I play these games.
You just did a vibe.
Yeah, so it just wasn't for me. It turned out that, you know, adventure's in the sweet spot, but I'm gonna try out legendary mode just so I get a sense.
Yeah, for me, I want
it, you know?
I want the creatures to say, "You can have my resources when you pry them from my cold dead hand,"
which is basically what they do in legendary mode, right? Because they go even faster than they do in challenge mode.
They move a lot faster. They attack even faster than they do on challenge mode. Your health is reduced relative to challenge mode.
Can you outrun an ampy in challenge?
No.
So like it's just gonna get you if you don't fight it.
You better dodge.
I mean, you can maybe like get across a gap or something. I think maybe later game once you've got more run speed and stuff. But yeah, ampies will get you. But also like the big thing is that enemies actually have double health. And
because in challenge mode there's no health increase.
In challenge mode there's no health increase, and the reason for the double health on enemies is basically something that I was experiencing, which is there's so many different combat items in the game between like the gadgets and the trinkets and the weapons and like different ways to build out your character, that the difference in damage output between somebody who's
between me and Seth, for example.
Yeah. Between somebody who really knows what they're doing with the equipment and is using all of it to the max is probably anywhere between 5 and 10x.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So like I was laughing because there was somebody in the community who was talking about the last boss, and he was like, the last boss just like is so much health, and I don't know like why you guys made it so what happens on the last boss is, I'm not going to spoil anything about the story or whatever, but there's a mechanic in it where every now and then the boss does this thing that gives the boss a stack of a buff, and it makes the boss like a little bit stronger, but also makes the boss take more damage. I think that happens on maybe like 20-second intervals or something like that. And when I fought that boss, I killed the boss around 7 stacks on challenge mode. So it's just like three-ish minutes or something like that. And anytime I see videos of some of our players who have posted fighting this boss, oftentimes the boss will be around 20 stacks and they'll have the boss at half health. And so I'm just like, with the way that I built up my character or the way that I'm playing or whatever, I'm just absolutely annihilating things in challenge mode, bosses and enemies alike.
Bigger HP pools to be able to make use of all the cool stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, right? I want more damage sponges so I can actually have the payoff, of investing in all this equipment and stuff. And it does actually push you, like if you're, so I've been playing challenge or been playing legend mode throughout this week. And it does make the equipment so much more rewarding to experiment with, because like it matters a lot how much damage you can do. So yeah, otherwise though, in patch 1.1, we're sending it out for translation, for localization today, as of the day we're recording this podcast.
Yeah, I'm still going to finish auditing it and get it sent off, but they're scheduled to start on Monday. So it'll only take them a day because there's not very much text in this round. So
yeah, so like content wise, it's wrapped. Like we got so much good shit coming to this patch. Like we got some updates for building so that you can build your base much bigger by being able to like clear stuff out that you currently can't clear that's in the way. You can set your home teleporter. So if you want to move your base somewhere, I actually set up my base in the Spark Flats on Legend mode, just that way I can walk out the door and just get beset upon by a fuckload of ampies and just
it's perfect.
I'm living in combat.
That's nature
mode.
intended,
Yeah, and also it's just a little short walk over to the gardening place, right? So
of course.
We got that stuff. Obviously, we got the compendium. We have a bunch of new items for early game, which are very cool. And one of them is a rare drop, which we don't really have too many of those.
Those are basically isolated to fishing, essentially. So yeah, we'll start bringing some of those in, and we actually add a new system to be able to allow that to happen, because we just didn't do it at all for normal stuff.
So people are like, oh, are there legendaries in Crashlands 2? It's like, well, not really, but like all legendary was in Crashlands 1 was a rare drop, right? And so I guess technically, yes.
It's a particularly good rare drop, right? Which we do have because, like, when you fish stuff up, the various fishing weapons.
But also, every item is particularly good.
Well, exactly. I think that's the main thing. You don't need a legendary status if everything is good.
Everything is good. And the other thing that
which is actually a funny thing, because we've had a lot of players who like really liked the random rolls of things in the original, because in the original Crashlands, you're rolling quality and stats, right? And so you can have you can roll a terrible relative item, right? And so that's the funny thing about because in Crashlands 2, everything is good and interesting, right? But there are some people who are still like, oh, I liked being able to.
I want to sometimes have things that are bad.
Exactly, because that's actually what that means, right? Is that because what they're thinking of is that sometimes they got really good stuff in Crashlands 1. Like that's the part that they're missing, is knowing that they got something really good because they've seen bad stuff, right? And they have a clear signal, right? And they don't quite understand the idea that in Crashlands 2, just everything is good.
Everything's good.
And so you can find cool ways to use it. So what they don't realize they're asking for is, like you said, it's
more soup.
I want more bad stuff so I can feel better about the good stuff, you know?
So we're not
it's cool to
mobile jet.
Yeah, we're not doing that. It is cool seeing like people popping into the loadouts channel in our Discord where people can talk about like how to build different combinations of gear. And a question always comes in where somebody would be like, what pairs well with X? So they might be playing like the Rascal build, which is like all about bleeds. And they'd be like, what goes with this? And the answer is always everything.
Yeah.
Just
and
whatever.
Also, it depends, because a Rascal
it depends what you were trying to do.
Isn't a Rascal set, right? Because a Rascal set is 2 or 4 of bleed items, but there's a whole bunch of other bleed items, and depending on which 2 or 4 you put together and which other things you put together,
what else completely changes the outcome. So that's always super cool where people are really starting to kind of get a handle on just how flexible and crazy the equipment system is and how many different weird combos you can do. Mm-hmm. So that's super cool to see.
I also like the idea of, because if you're going to play in the most, what is it called, ludicrous legendary mode, if you're going to play in legendary mode, if you're new to the game, right, and you boot it up and you're like, I'm a gamer, fucking legendary, right? So you boot right into it. It just
which it does say not recommended for new players on it.
Just get your ass absolutely kicked, right? Then because it's gonna teach you that, like, because even if you like get past the first part and you start to get a few items and start trying to combine them together, if you don't think about it really carefully, like how to get a really, really good outcome, you're still gonna get your ass kicked, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's kind of that's interesting thing of like, if you're playing in those lower levels, since you don't have to fully engage with the possible like sheer power of getting a good combination of things, right, and can still play the game, have a really good time, then you can be completely unaware, basically, of like just how
powerful you could be,
all that kind of stuff could be. And I think it's going to be, it's challenge mode introduces the idea that like as you start to get your ass kicked, like, oh, you're going to have to actually work at this a bit and like figure some stuff out. And then legendary mode is like, no, you got it. There's just no way around it. So I think it'll be interesting to see how people interpret
how people min-max their way through it. Yeah, because I mean, it is on the one hand, people. And we got this comment at the very beginning when people thought that like all we did in challenge mode was increase enemy health just because they noticed that it was taking them longer to kill enemies.
Because it literally is just so funny because it's like the health does not go up at all.
Yeah, that's the one thing we didn't really change.
So all it means is just that you were running away a lot.
Yep. Yeah, it means you were doing less damage because you're not playing very aggressively.
Because you're a coward, So
you gotta. Yeah, buck up. But in Legend mode, we do increase the health, and it was interesting because when people were talking about that with challenge mode, they were like, I can't believe how lazy this challenge mode is, where all they did was increase the health, which again we did not do. But it's the idea that like increasing health to get a higher difficulty is not meaningful is I think it's wrong. Because like if that's all you do, then it's just things just take longer.
If it's the case that there's not tools that the player can engage with to basically optimize their damage such that they can just like wreck stuff, then it feels shittier. It's like in Borderlands where you're just like you can't really do a lot. You're just shooting a person for now like 2 minutes straight as opposed to
which is not harder. It just takes longer, right? So
the part that's harder isn't the action. It's just that because you have to do it longer, your risk of you messing up is higher. Because in a game like that, if you have a gun and you defeat enemies by pointing at them and clicking and holding the trigger, you can't do that faster or harder.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like it's not a test of your ability to deal damage. It just takes longer. So, but the thing in Crashlands 2 is because of the way combat works and because of the way the equipment sets work, there is a vast difference in damage output between players. And so it does make sense to add, whereas like challenge mode is a test of your reflexes, basically. And legend mode is that plus a test of your understanding of
basically tactical.
How everything fits together. So, and then one last thing on patch 1.1, reduced pet cooldowns.
Yeah. We thought about them originally as like basically as an ultimate move. If you're familiar with like playing the MOBA, it's just a move that you get to use every so often that just wrecks stuff.
They hit hard.
And it's some players who were just like, I want my pet to be doing stuff more often. So honestly, sure. Because the reality is like total DPS is basically the same, for how we're going to balance it.
Yeah.
Like
we cut their cooldown down and just cut their damage down to match proportionally. Adjusted a couple of like masteries and stuff like that relate to when your pet uses its ability. But so you'll have much more active pets.
What was it, 20 seconds to 10 or something? What did you? Yeah,
it was 20. Right now I've got it at 10 and we're playing with that kind of today and over the weekend to kind of see how that's feeling. But it also is interesting because most of your gadgets and combat items have around a 10-second cooldown. And so it does kind of bring your pet more in line with the rest of the stuff that you have. If you kind of think about like when your pet does damage, it's kind of like you used a gadget to do some damage. You know what I mean? So it fits a little better and all that. So I think there'll be a lot of people who are excited about the fact that their pet will be more involved in combat. So lots of cool stuff there. I think the last thing to talk about today, which will hit pretty quick because we got to keep things tight, is Oblivion Remastered Shadow dropped out of fucking nowhere.
Yeah, crazy.
So our understanding is essentially they used their normal engine, the original engine that it was made in, and they used that as sort of like under the hood to still manage a lot of the gameplay and interactions and whatever. And they essentially kind of wrapped it in Unreal Engine 5 for handling the visual side of things.
That way they can absolutely punch up all the graphics, but without having to fully rebuild like the underlying game. Yeah. Which is that's like that. And to do that, like that sounds like, oh, cool. So you just like separate those out. Like still an enormous engineering challenge without.
And that game came out in like 2006.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's no fucking way that they could have easily
there's no
translated
ease. There's no ease here, I think. But I think so I got to play it a bit yesterday and I had a very good time with it, honestly. It's very fun. It's Yeah, I think it's still clunky in all the same ways it was. But I think it's like Skyrim where it's like there's a certain kind of like Pringle quality to those games to me, which is like the combat isn't particularly crazy, right? The like RPG elements aren't particularly overly wrought, nothing's like, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different systems you can touch, but there's not like you go into every dungeon you go into, every cave you go into is like almost the same cave. And like you'll go through the whole thing.
Pasted it.
Yeah, you go through like the whole thing. You kill like 5 wolves and then you just find like another lockpick at the bottom of it. Like there's nothing in there. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the stuff, oftentimes there's sort of a missing reward, whereas in more of the modern designs, there's like actually good shit located in these caves. There's slightly more interesting stuff happening. But again, it's like there's some Pringle quality to it, where it's like all of it is just engaging enough, and then the rewards are drip fed at like some particular kind of rate as far as like when exactly you get something good from one of those dungeon runs. That it's just fun to play. I don't know. It's just a fun game,
It's just got it's got that old game charm.
Yeah, and like there's, I was actually laughing talking about like reading words problem because of course, these are actually quest games like Skyrim, where also there's a lot of words, a lot of text, a lot of people telling you to go places and do stuff. And what was amusing to me after having made Crashlands 2, playing Oblivion is like the simplicity of all of their quest designs is like kind of amazing, where it's always just because the reality is like you can only kind of do one thing, which is like beat up stuff.
Oh, like you can go places, talk to people, and kill things.
Yeah.
Right.
And like they might have you like wait at some point, or had this one that was like a cool moment. I walked into a bar. I was supposed to meet up with some guy in like a shady deal. And he was like, sit down. And he wouldn't talk to me. Every time I talked to me, he'd be like, just sit down. And so I finally sat, interact with a stool, sit on it. Then I could look over and talk to him. And then he'd have a conversation.
So there's a fourth thing you can do in Quest.
Yeah.
That is actually very funny because having played a lot of the Fallout games where you can sit, but there's just no reason.
Nobody even asked you to. So at some point,
there's no reason to do it, but it's
but
cool.
we know from making Crashlands that like if there are chairs, people are like, I want to be able to sit on this, and then you can, and then you just stand up and move on.
Yeah, so it was a very good time playing it. But I think that the shadow drop thing is to me the interesting from like a dev standpoint.
Yeah. So when you say shadow drop, did it literally appear, and everyone's like, "Holy shit, this just appeared," or was there like a short preamble we're talking about?
It literally appeared. So the thing is,
it leaked. It leaked like 2 days before, I think. Like on social media, people were saying something about Oblivion Remastered.
Because I thought I saw some stuff about it right before it came out.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate about it with being real, but then it just.
Well, yeah. So things like it's been like an open secret that they've been working on it. That's been known for some time. Like a year, 2 years, something like that. And I think because there was like an Xbox or a Game Pass event, like some marketing beat or whatever else, that there was basically some speculation about, are they going to tell us about this, right? We haven't heard any official news about this yet. And then they just fucking drop it, right? So it's now on Game Pass. Also, it's on Steam all of a sudden, right? And it's got like 200,000 concurrent players on Steam all of a sudden. All this stuff, right? And so what I think is fascinating about it, though, is that like we talked about picking launch dates, right? A few weeks ago.
Yeah, how you gonna?
Yeah, if that was your launch date, goodbye.
Yeah, and like there's actually this huge, really great RPG that just came out, fresh team, like whole new thing called Clair Obscure, and it's been getting great reviews and stuff. And they happen to be launching, I think today or yesterday. It was like basically the day after this fucking shadow drop thing. And we talk about it's not going to matter in a huge way for them because again, like there is a difference between there's a difference between like press and influencers, like what exactly they're going to cover at any given time, and then like what players are playing because other people are playing it, right? But it doesn't help to have something as enormous as like a game that is 20 years old that tons of people have played that now looks cool as shit. Just showing up like a giant RPG, basically showing up the day before your giant RPG that is brand new, no one has played before shows up. It's
and in this case, they're fairly
rough.
Direct competitors, right? But even because when you're launching a game, most of what you're competing for is just attention, so that people know what's going on. Yeah. And then we even had this with Blueprints, right? As back when we chose our launch date, there was nothing coming out. Yeah, like just nothing on that day. There was a few like Switch only titles or something, right? But there was just nothing coming out. I don't even know when Blueprints announced their release date. I couldn't find a definitive thing, but it seemed pretty recent, like pretty proximal to their launch. And so that's one of those things is like when they were looking at that date, and then by the time we launched, there was a bunch of stuff coming out on that day.
Yeah.
But the one in particular that everybody was talking about was Blueprints, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know that if we knew ahead of time that was going to come out, that we would have thought that was going to soak up as much attention as it did, right? But it is what everybody was talking about, right? Like all the attention was on that game during our launch. And so even though we weren't a meaningful direct competitor, like nothing similar about the two games, right? The thing that we're competing for in common is very limited attention of sort of the attention economy around games, streamers, articles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting to me about it is like, I don't know, but it's cool as a player to like get, like a shadow drop happens, right? Very cool. Especially if it's a thing that you've been thinking about and like wondering about. But it is a weird thing to me, to be honest, where like, so Microsoft owns now like a bajillion of these studios, right? They have Game Pass. They have a relationship with indies and indie publishers. It's honestly weird to me for a company in that position to suddenly drop a title of this like remake magnitude when...
I don't think it's weird, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, just because it's like...
Weird, or do you mean just hostile? Like what?
It's not even hostile, just like it's very... It's just inconsiderate, to be honest. Like even just like because giving a month of heads up, like, hey, we're going to do this, whatever else, even would let some people push dates around, like.
Yeah, honestly, because like if I was that whatever obscure game and I had a launch date, and then even even if like a week ahead of time, I was like, oh fuck, like Oblivion is coming on my launch day. Yeah, I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna put this 2 weeks until that calms down a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that was the angle. I was like, that's an interesting move.
I agree. I agree that it's inconsiderate, but in the same way that everything large companies do is inconsiderate in the sense that
it's not surprising.
It only takes into account cost benefit to yourself, right? And so if you say like, all right, we can shadow drop this thing, and because of the anticipation of it and because of blah, 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 we don't need to spend any amount of time worrying about marketing ahead of time. Mm-hmm. We don't need to make trailers, and like we don't need to do a big press tour. We can just put it up and be done. And that's obviously a better use of your time and money than doing all that other shit for no real reason, right? And so if you think you can shadow drop a game, you should.
Oh, yeah.
But it is.
Well, I mean, you individually should. But I think what's interesting to me is because
it does have a lot of negative impacts.
It can have a lot of negative impacts. And like the company has partner relationships. So it's not quite the same to me as like if we decided to shadow drop something, right? Because you're like, oh, yeah, this would work. We don't.
Yeah, we don't own a store.
We don't own a store that people are like, I don't know.
We're not gonna take over Steam and Twitch for a whole week by shadow dropping, fucking roid rage.
Well, I'm saying even if you could, because of what our studio is, which is just a game studio. We don't have other.
We're not vertically integrated.
Exactly. We don't have other B2B relationships with other indies in a way that you know what I mean. It's like I don't know. There's something about it where I was like, it's very cool on the player side. Also feels kind of fucking rude on the dev side, but whatever. You guys do you. I'm just glad our launch date wasn't fucking today.
Oh yeah, that was.
Oh my god, that would have been.
Yeah. I'm thinking like I agree. I agree. It's rude, but in the same way that just about everything businesses do is rude.
Actually, it kind of reminds me too of I just saw some people talking about how like I don't know if it's like right now this weekend or something, and it's like there's some kind of like indie bookstore, kind of like I don't know if it's a real holiday or like a industry holiday, but there's some kind of an indie bookstore thing where like all the independent bookstores are like doing sales and trying to bring in foot traffic and stuff. And both Amazon and Barnes and Noble were like, "Hey, we're going to do huge sales at that time too, right?" Nice. It's just to be the biggest assholes about it, right? Yeah. And it's one of those. It's like they didn't have to.
But if you're a big company, you view everything in the lens of competition, right? So like if somebody else succeeds, that's success that you could have had that you're not having now, right? Yep. So you got to take them out. You got to kill them. That's just the way it is. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, the thing is, I do still probably plan on playing Oblivion this weekend because.
Well, the thing is, I'm going to play both, but like in Claire Script, both of them are on Game Pass, which is also wild.
Yeah, so you can just go play
them. Yeah, it's also weird to me from like a programming standpoint, from portfolio plan. These, again, we've talked to these people about their portfolio strategies and stuff. It is weird to me to be like, the same fucking week on this subscription service, drop 2 giant RPGs that everybody wants. Like, you got full control of one of them that you could just shadow drop whenever. Yeah, it feels like maybe put.
But the attention economy thing again is like within something like Game Pass, people get paid.
I know.
They get paid when people are playing your game if enough of them play.
Enough of them play it.
So this is also a smart way if you are.
I know. If you're
Xbox.
If you're vertically integrated.
To prevent having to pay out larger sums of money to a company you don't also own.
Exactly.
Right? Not saying that's what they did. I don't know what they did.
But a little bit of conspiracy there.
It's not necessarily not what they did.
In any case, it is the outcome, right? The outcome is
what happened.
Yeah, because I don't think we can. I don't think we're allowed to talk about like exactly how it works. I think it's probably under NDA stuff. But it's all of these systems are sort of winner take all right. So if you spread the attention out over time, because it might be the case that this other game over time in Game Pass ends up with kind of the same amount of players otherwise would have. That's possible, right? People play Oblivion, they've already played it, they play a bunch of it. Try the other game.
That's not how you get your extra money.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because what matters is peak. What matters is like how high can you get at like during one single month, right? Or one single week or one single day. And so if that gets knocked down because you're just being battered into oblivion, right?
Yeah, it just seemed weird to me, to be honest, because that also means that they knew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm like, what? I don't know.
People were giving shit to, I think rightfully, to Spotify for dropping a bunch of AI created music on its platform. Cause like on the Spotify side of things, if you're streaming something owned by Spotify, they don't pay out royalties to anybody.
Yeah.
They take your subscription, and the royalty would go to an artist just goes to Spotify, so it does nobody gets paid, right?
Well, yeah, but it is like, to be really clear though, it's worse than just like money that if you listen to something else, money would have gone somewhere else. They actually still, at least as far as people have described, I don't know if anybody knows for sure.
They don't better slice the pie.
Yeah, that's still a slice of the pie. So like the AI music,
they just put it in their own pocket.
They just put it in their own pocket. Yeah. So everybody makes less money, not only from time, but the pie gets smaller. So the pie gets smaller and the attention gets smaller at the same time.
Yeah, which is also the same as like Nintendo with their first party games on the eShop, right? Where it's like if they put up, Mario Kart and Zelda and all these different things, if they feature those games, they keep 100% of the money.
Yep.
And if they feature someone else's game, they only get to keep some percentage of them, like 30% of the money. And so obviously it's going to bias toward featuring their own stuff all the time.
This is why every store features its own shit because they
get a lot more money per sale than otherwise. So it's vertical integration is a real it's a real sticking point in the industry, I think.
Well, there's a reason that over the course of recent history, it's repeated. People have been repeatedly trying to make it as illegal as possible to do, right?
Yeah,
is because
you control the entire stack top to bottom.
Yeah, because it allows you to do this kind of stuff, and then everybody else gets squeezed out, and that's it. Then the industry implodes, which is what is happening. The entire games industry.
But that's always happening.
It's always happening.
It is, but the thing is, though, it does keep getting worse. And that's the remarkable thing. Is like we've been hearing since we started that like what they call it was the indie apocalypse, right? Was what they called it. A couple years after we started making games, where everybody's like,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, they're surveying the world, and they're like, oh wow, it's gotten, because there are all these people who were like basically before us, the kind of the early indie cohort, who like if you made a decent game, got it onto a store, you made decent money actually, right? There was like a relationship there of make good stuff, get income for it. And as more and more people entered the space, as the stores changed their behaviors, like all this kind of stuff started to happen very quickly, that started to just plummet. And people were seeing a smaller rate of success stories and all this kind of stuff, right? And that was true more than a decade ago, right? And that was somebody coined the term apocalypse, and there were all these articles about it at the time, right? And the remarkable thing is that none of that has gotten better, right, over time. It's like there have been like little like peaks and valleys as new things came out that people could try to find new opportunities for, and like we've benefited from those, right? But the net thing has been this kind of like downward trend where baseline is just like getting harder.
I think it's always been winner take all. I think it's just that the winners are becoming increasingly merged.
Well, but I think it's just because it's moving from winners take all to platform take all, because now the platform is
that's what I'm saying. The platforms were always the winners.
Yeah,
always. And now the platforms are owning studios, and so the platform still wins. It's just there's fewer external parties that can take part. So it's pretty wild out there. But hey, we're still kicking.
Survive.
What are you gonna do? All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives.
And don't forget your plushie. Get it.
Yeah, head on over to, we'll have a link in the show notes for getting your Flux Plush. And also, if you haven't, go to Steam, Google Play, and the App Store and pick up a copy of Crashlands 2. Because it's doing great, and we got some more good stuff coming. So check that out. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye. Bye.